We live in 2025 and Beyonce's green internet is full of resources for you to use. So like I said, it's important to ask questions to like the leasing agent when you're touring. Some of the important questions to ask that I suggest you write down include like one tip if you're moving to a city, especially a newer up and coming city where people are starting to move there a lot more. Pay attention to, and also remember that leases are contracts and contracts are meant to be negotiated. Thinking about living with a man? Ooh, I can't even think about that because men are just no. Hi everyone, welcome to season 2 of Transplants, the podcast for 20-somethings moving to a new city and trying to navigate all the trials and tribulations that come with it. I'm your host Joyce, and today we're going to be talking about apartment hunting 101. If you're looking for your first apartment post-grad outside of college, then this is definitely the episode for you. I realized in the very first episode of Transplants, I talked about moving 101 and I touched on apartment hunting, but thought it might be helpful to do a little bit of a deep dive and share the knowledge that I've acquired over the past few years of apartment hunting post-grad, because that can be daunting when you're doing that for the first time as an adult and you don't have a co-signer. You're doing all the things by yourself. So grab a notepad, grab your little Word doc, and let's get into it. So apartment hunting can be really fun, especially when it's the first time you're doing this like as a new adult. It's really exciting to like dream up what your new life will look like and see yourself in the new space, have your Pinterest board. I know my Pinterest board for my apartment is very long, very deep, because I love interior decorating, all those things. That's just definitely up my alley. And I can see how it's very easy to get carried away with what your life could potentially look like. But at the same time, apartment hunting can be really stressful, especially if you're moving to a bigger city like New York or LA, and you're in those places where people want to be. Apartments will go like that if you're not prepared. So hopefully this episode will get you thinking about things that you may not have thought of when apartment hunting and set you up for success. So while it's fun to have your Pinterest board organized for your apartment, you should also be organized within your documentation, especially when apartment hunting, like I said, in bigger cities where apartments will go very quickly. You need to have all of your documents in order, like your proof of income, different things like that. Anything that you need, you should put it all in like a Google Drive folder or like a USB so that it's super easy for you to send to your leasing agent, whoever, whenever you're ready to sign. If you're moving for the first time post-grad and you haven't like worked yet, you can use your offer letter as proof of income. And that way you can be able to sign a lease. So one, proof of income is super important. And just keep in mind that different apartment complexes will have different requirements for your income level. They might say that you need to make 3 times like your monthly expenses or something like that. But just keep that in mind whenever you're searching. But we'll get to the searching portion in just a little bit. But overall, you need to be organized when doing your apartment hunting. You need to have all of your paperwork and affairs in orders. Sometimes you might need to carry around a checkbook. Like I said, if you're hunting in a highly populated, like sought after places or leases will go very quickly, and leasers, landlords, whatever they're called, will want they want to sign up their places as quickly as possible. And if you're able to show them money right then and there, then you might be able to get an apartment before someone else does. When I was apartment hunting, I made a Google spreadsheet of all the places that I was looking at, and I organized it by the complex, the monthly rent, utilities, other notes, amenities, things like that. The distance it was from my office, because I was starting my first job post-grad for the first time and wanted to make sure that I wasn't living too far away from the office so that my commute wasn't absolutely horrible every single day. But with that being said, you can start to think about what you want in an apartment and start to list out your priorities. Think of what you need versus things that are nice to have. Do you want a balcony? Do you have a pet that might need more space? Do you want to be living close to nature or like in a walkable area? Or do you want to live in the city where there's more nightlife and you're able to go out whenever you want to? Or do you want to live a little bit more quieter where you're in the suburbs and you're not necessarily closer to nightlife, but your rent may be cheaper. Think about your work commute. Think about whether you want to be on the first floor or not. There's a lot of things to consider, but don't let it overwhelm you. Just keep in mind that you don't have to have all the bells and whistles, especially for your first apartment post-grad. You're really just establishing your life, establishing your roots. And it's okay if you don't have, a high-rise penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and natural sunlight and blah, 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 blah. Not everyone is going to get that in their first apartment. Believe me, I would have loved that, but I'm very excited or satisfied with the place that I've been living in post-grad. I think I found a really nice spot that checked off a lot of my boxes. But at the same time, not all of the boxes were checked, which is fine because over time you'll make more money and you'll start to live in places that feel, much more aligned with that Pinterest board of yours. I support, living the life of your dreams, but just remember that you need to live within your means. You need to be able to pay said rent, and you may not necessarily be able to if you're trying to check off all these amenities that may look nice on paper, may look nice in pictures, but your faucet doesn't work or they never pick up the trash and things like that. So just make sure that you're keeping your priorities in check when starting your search. So when doing the actual searching and hunting for an apartment, it's super important for you to utilize your resources. We live in 2025 and Beyonce's green internet is full of resources for you to use. There's Discord, there's Reddit, TikTok might not exist by the time this episode is out. So RIP TikTok, YouTube, Facebook groups. There's so many resources for you to use when hunting for an apartment where you can read reviews, ask people questions, see what people think about the area. There's a lot of tools on the internet at your disposal that may not be things that you think about when apartment hunting, but be sure to use those places where people, congregate, are in community, because that's where people can speak up and give you advice from their personal experience. In addition to those places where you'll get like people's real authentic reviews, like Google reviews, etc., you can also utilize different listing websites like, apartmentlist.com. There's a lot of different websites that you can use to like hunt for apartments that I will list in the show notes of this episode. But be sure to utilize those spaces where people are congregating online, because that's where you'll get real, authentic, no holding back reviews. Okay, so at this point, you've started to organize all of your documents and your paperwork. You're starting to find some apartments that you want to tour. You've got your spreadsheet all organized. Very proud of you. At this point, you can start touring apartments, which can be a lot of fun. Like I said, visualizing how you could live in a space is very, aspirational, very fun, very inspirational. But keep in mind that this is a critical time for you to ask super important questions for the leasing agent, any residents that you may see in the hallway while you're touring. You can, pick their brains. Just be sure that you're covering all your bases when you're touring and you're not moving into a place that doesn't 100% feel right. So when you're touring, definitely take lots of pictures, lots of videos, do all those things, but also take into account the fixtures of the unit, take into account like the plumbing and things like that. Like, yes, we love like a white wall and we love stainless steel appliances, no white refrigerators, cute hardware, things like that. But the little things that will impact your everyday life need to be, ticked and tied, because if your water is like disgusting, like right now, my water is coming out cloudy out of my faucets. And it wasn't like that when I first moved in, but if you're touring and you notice that, that's a no-no. And hopefully my water is fixed soon, because it's quite literally disgusting. And I just want to cry, but here we are. Anyway, when you're touring, be sure to keep a critical eye on those things. So like I said, fixtures, lighting, plumbing, electrical, those are all super important things that will affect your quality of living once you move in. And to make sure that you're touring a unit that is actually open and available for someone to rent, you want to be sure that you're touring a unit that you'll actually live in, rather than a different like model unit, because the model unit may look great and this, that, and the third, but the unit that you're actually going to be living in might not be as cute. So make sure that you're touring a unit that you'll actually be able to live in and you're able to see all the problems before, moving into that spot. So like I said, it's important to ask questions to like the leasing agent when you're touring. Some of the important questions to ask that I suggest you write down include like utilities. So what utilities are included, if any? A lot of apartment complexes, like when you're post-grad and it's not like student living, you'll have to pay the utilities on your own. So you can just ask if there's anything but a lot of the time it won't be. For the utilities that are included, you could ask like what's the average that people pay in this type of unit. That'll give you a good gauge on what your monthly expenses will be. But if you're like in a colder climate, make sure to take into account that in the winter you're probably going to be paying more for heating and like gas, things like that. And then vice versa, if you're living somewhere hotter, you might be paying more for utilities in the summer for AC, this, that, and the third. You can also ask about noise level, especially if you're going to be living in or like near a city. How does the maintenance process work? Is maintenance usually like timely? Do they respond to things in a timely manner, or does it take them like 2 weeks to respond to like your maintenance requests? You can ask about restrictions on decorating, because I know some places allow you to paint the walls, some places don't. I also think it's important, well, not necessarily important, but if you're, a visualizer like me and you like to see how you could potentially lay out space, you got that Pinterest board ready, you can also ask how they would lay out the space or how past tenants have laid out the space. I definitely did that on my tour, and I was already looking at like, small dining room tables with like a couple of chairs. And glad I didn't buy anything beforehand, because once I got here, after I put in all the necessities like a couch, a TV stand, a desk, there was absolutely no room for that dining room table. So I'm glad I asked, and I'm glad that I didn't buy it beforehand, because the leasing lady was definitely like, oh yeah, I've seen people put a dining room table in this corner, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, cute. Like I was already saving the links. But once I actually started moving things in, yeah, there was no dining room table in here, which is fine because I got a bar and some bar stools, which is cute. But yeah, I do miss that dining room table that I saw on my Facebook Marketplace, RIP. But yeah, just keep those couple things in mind when you're searching. I know it can sometimes be like a long and hard process, especially if things are opening up or they're not in your price range or things like that. But trust the process. You can always like sublet and take over someone's lease in like a house or an apartment for a short period of time before you move into your own place. I think that's especially a good tip for people who are moving to a different state. If you're struggling to find a place, or you can't like tour apartments before you actually like move to your new state, city, whatever, it might be easier for you to just take over someone else's lease, move a couple of your things with you while you're there, and start to, tour and hunt for places. And then once you find your own, you can move the rest of your stuff into your unit. That might be an easier approach if the search is looking a little bit bleak. But yeah, you can usually find places to sublet in Facebook groups. That's the most productive source that I've seen. But again, utilize your resources. I know that brain in that big old head of yours works, so use it. One tip, if you're moving to a city, especially a newer up and coming city where people are starting to move there a lot more, pay attention to newer buildings, because those buildings are trying to fill up their units. They're trying to recruit tenants, and sometimes they'll have deals where you can get like the first 2 months of rent free, pay no deposit, things like that. There's different little things that they'll do to entice people to get them to live in this new building. So keep that in mind when searching. Also, pro tip, if you're able to physically tour the place and not do like a virtual tour, this might be a little bit harder if you're moving from out of state, but drive by the complex at night, especially if you're a woman and you're going to be living on your own. You want to feel safe wherever you're going to be. So drive by the complex at night, because when the sun goes down, that's when people start to do shady things, and we are not about that. Okay. So drive by that apartment complex at night, just see what's going on. You don't have to like lurk and be like a creeper, but just pay attention to what people are doing, pay attention to your surroundings, and if some shady things are going on, then cut that boy off the list. Okay, so now at this point, you have been doing your searching, you've started touring a couple places, you have maybe like one or two in mind that you'd like to sign a lease at. One thing that I want to encourage you to do is negotiate your rent price. And I know that is not something that is necessarily encouraged. A lot of people will just take, the rent price that they have and take it as it is. I know I definitely did that, but I realized when just thinking about apartment hunting, you have the liberty to negotiate. And even just as like a woman navigating life and like work and things like that, there are opportunities to negotiate that we just don't take, and we're taking things at face value when, we could be getting cheated, and there's better opportunities out there. So don't be afraid to negotiate, especially if you're, a younger person in their 20s. It's easy for landlords and people to take advantage of you, but don't let them do that, okay? If you know that you're going to be staying somewhere for a little while, for example, if you just signed like an offer letter post-grad and you have to stay at your company for like 2 or 3 years, a lot of companies will sign you into a contract like that. You can negotiate that when signing a lease, because usually when you sign a longer term lease, then you can get a lower rent rate. I said that backwards. Rent rate. And usually apartment complexes will like that because they don't have to worry about filling up that unit, because they know you're going to be there for, 14 months, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. If you land on a place that you're willing and able to stay in for a little while, then definitely look at signing a longer lease and see how that can help you in the negotiating process. You can also leverage your move-in date when considering signing a lease. I saw on Miss TikTok a while ago, this woman was sharing how moving in the last week of the month is a way for you to reduce like your rent rate or get a deal or things like that, because at the end of the month, apartment complexes are trying to meet their quota. So they're trying to get people, to sign leases and take up units. So think about that when thinking about your move-in date. If you, like I mentioned, have like an offer letter, and this is your first like big move post-grad, you can also leverage your company. So if you're apartment hunting, definitely ask the complexes and the leasing agents if they have a list of preferred employers, because that can get you a couple of different deals. It depends on like where you're at in the apartment complex and things like that, but you can get a discount on your security deposit. You may not have to pay a deposit as all. You can not have to pay the application fee for the apartment. There's different deals that they'll do if your company is on that list. So be sure to ask about that when you're apartment hunting. Like I mentioned at the top of the episode, it's super important for you to be organized when apartment hunting and have like all your documents in order. Maybe carry around a checkbook if you're apartment hunting in a bigger city that a lot of people want to move to, like New York, LA, etc. Sometimes if you are willing and able to put money down there on the spot, then you may be able to get cheaper rent. So say like you're talking to a landlord like, hey, I'm ready to sign right now. If I give you a money order or a check right now, can I get cheaper rent? Don't know if they'll say yes, but you can try it, because if you never ask, the answer will always be no. Just keep that in mind when negotiating your apartment, literally anything. If you never ask, the answer will be no. And also remember that leases are contracts, and contracts are meant to be negotiated. So don't let people take advantage of you, especially if you're doing this on your own for the first time. It can be super overwhelming when trying to think of all the things that go into apartment hunting and making sure that you're able to sign on a place, but it's okay. Everything will be fine. Just keep all of your ducks in a row and remember that you kind of have the upper hand, because apartment complexes are looking for you. They're looking for tenants to fill up their spaces. They want to fill up their units, because if their units are empty, then they're not making money. Okay, so you are the prize. Okay, so now you've done your searching, your touring, your negotiating, you're ready to sign. Yay, congrats, so exciting. And now you have to worry about moving, which is a whole nother beast in and of itself. But once you get through it, it's like mostly fine. Mostly fine. But like I mentioned earlier, a tip that I saw is to set your move-in date for the last week of the month. You could also try moving during the winter, because not a lot of people are trying to move when it's cold outside, and it's not like as popular season. A lot of people will move in like the summer and fall, and if you move in the winter, you might have the possibility of getting cheaper rent. It might be cold and you might be, freezing your little fingers off when pushing them boxes, but it'll be fine. I won't get into too much detail about moving because you can go back to episode 1 of Transplants called Moving 101, where I talk about all the fun stuff about moving and getting yourself to a new city, which is, like I said, a whole nother process that can be overwhelming. But that episode definitely gives you a good groundwork to base yourself off of. But yeah, that is apartment hunting in a nutshell. That is all the knowledge that I've gathered, in my couple of years of living in an apartment and being an adult. It's been an interesting time. My first apartment was in college, it was like student living, but also like families could live there. So it was like an interesting situation. And I remember I had my roommate horror story where they almost set the apartment on fire. That was a time. And maybe I'll tell that on a different day. Maybe I'll post a little story time on Instagram or something, but that is another story for another day. And this whole apartment hunting journey might look a little bit different if you're moving in with roommates, because you have to take into account other people's desires and needs, especially if they have pets or are not able-bodied or things like that. There's other things to consider when you're not only thinking about yourself. And I would love to do an episode in the future about moving with a partner, if you're in a relationship, because that I have not done that before. So I would love to have a guest on to talk about that. But thinking about living with a man, I can't even think about that, because men are just no. I can't even fathom that, because I like my space. I like how it is. Like, I like how it's decorated. And for a man to come and infect and infiltrate just sounds like a nightmare. And I know that's going to be my life at some point, but not today, baby. Not today. But yeah, that concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it helped. Please be sure to follow Transplants on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow at Transplants Podcast on Instagram. At this point, I don't think TikTok exists anymore, but Instagram is where you can find us. We're also on Threads if you're on that bag, but follow us on there. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. And remember, you're not as alone as you think.